This is it, everyone. This is the greatest anime series ever made. At least in my opinion. I hold this series in high regard. I consider this series to be even better than Violet Evergarden and Cowboy Bebop. Two shows that I have highly rated on this channel. Because as fantastic as these shows are, they still had the occasional setbacks. Not that they detracted from their overall presentation, mind you. It's just that this particular series I'm about to tell you about is as close to perfect as it gets. This is pretty much the anime equivalent of Breaking Bad. That's how good this is, at least in my opinion, is superior to Breaking Bad. This series has a hook that reeled me in from the start and never let go until its climactic end, which really leaves an impact on you. It has such a brilliant clash between its protagonist and antagonist, and there's so many in-depth themes about the value of a human soul and so many other things, all in one long yet satisfyingly paced story. This series, whether in its original manga form or indeed in its anime adaptation, proves the fact, without a shadow of a doubt, that animation and graphic novels can be a work of art, standing tall among the likes of Dostoevsky or Tolkien. There's still a stigma these days that animation is but children's fodder, but series like this, as well as Violet Evergarden and Cowboy Bebop and many others I could mention, proves that statement wrong. So,
brace yourself.
Without further delay, I give you what I consider the greatest anime series ever made, which is Monster. Yes, Monster is the greatest anime series ever made. It has a brilliant story. It kept me engaged from beginning to end. It's the peak example of psychological thriller in the manga and anime collection that you can find. I've watched other psychological thriller animes like Death Note and Code Geass, but those kind of shows tended to be fairly disappointing because Death Note had a great start, but its quality was only in the first third of the series. And afterwards, the series really dipped in quality to the point where it reached a very nihilistic outcome, which completely contradicted the premise of the entire series. And as for Code Geass, that certainly had better world building, but by the second season it got really carried away with filler episodes and a lot of sexual exploitation. Seriously, we do not want to see sexual exploitation of high school girls. But Monster takes the strengths of those kinds of anime shows and perfects it. There was not one moment in this series where I felt, oh, this is a waste of time. Oh, this is just so stupid. No. This series, on the other hand, has none of these flaws. There's no filler, no unnecessary fluff, no positive endorsement of exploitation, just pure, engaging narrative. And it works brilliantly. There is so much dark topic matter throughout this entire series, and yet it's never fully nihilistic. In fact, it boldly stands against nihilism with a positive message about how love, hope, and kindness can counter the overwhelming darkness of nihilism. And the series has such psychological depth. It is honestly on par with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It is that well written. So, here's the premise.
Brace yourself.
The series is centered on a Japanese doctor in 20th century Germany by the name of Dr. Kenzo Tenma. He's having the time of his life as a talented neurosurgeon that a lot of people rely on, and he even has a nice fiancée named Eva. All seems going well for him. What a happy life. But all is not well within the hospital that Dr. Kenzo Tenma finds himself working in, as within his hospital work, he is under pressure from internal politics that hires him to save certain important political figures at the expense of neglecting other people who would benefit from his healing potential. This completely contradicts Kenzo Tenma's egalitarian values, and he begins to have doubts about his workforce. But if that wasn't bad enough, Tenma is about to find himself in a situation that no one in his profession would ever want to find themselves in. The choice on whose life to save. One night, two people come in on the brink of death. The mayor of the small town and a boy dying from a bullet wound in his head. And Tenma only has enough time to save one person. Who does he save? Getting fed up with the double standards of the internal politics, Tenma decides to save the boy. He successfully manages to remove the bullet from his head, but unfortunately the mayor ends up passing on, and Tenma gets fired from his position, and as it turns out, his fiancée Eva turned out to be a spoiled jerk. Many years later, Tenma is barely getting by with a medical position on helping other people, but then the monster appears. You see, as it turns out, unfortunately for Dr. Kenzo Tenma, that young boy he saved turned out to grow up to be a psychopathic mass-manipulating serial killer. Yikes. This killer by the name of Johann Liebert is so efficient at leaving no traces of his crimes that the blame for the murders gets landed on Kenzo Tenma. So now with the ruthless Inspector Lunge on his back, Tenma finds himself on the run as a fugitive to put an end to the monster that he unintentionally created. Thus begins an epic cat and mouse game where Tenma is trying to catch Johann Liebert and finds himself embroiled in a whole web of mysteries, conspiracies, controversies, and a vast labyrinthian scope of characters who all get caught up in the chaos, who are either involved with the mystery behind this killer or just get caught up in the chaos. And due to his resilience and kindness, Tenma does eventually pick up a few allies along the way. A psychiatrist, a young boy named Dieter, Johann's twin sister Nina, among others. Eventually, Tenma and the few friends he can gather team up together to try to find a way to put a stop to Johann Liebert's schemes. Will Tenma finally put a stop to this immoral monster? And if he does, will he do so in a way that compromises his egalitarian values? As I said before, the story does a great job of hooking you in and never letting go until the very end. Yeah, the story is very slow-paced, but much like Breaking Bad, the slow pace is worth it to build up the characters. And speaking of the characters, one thing that really impresses me about this entire series is the fact that the story remains consistent even with the vast majority of characters it has. This story could have easily have strayed into inconsistent storytelling with how people complain about Spider-Man 3 and how it tried to introduce so many villains in a way that ended up being fairly convoluted. But thankfully, Monster doesn't have that problem because several side characters have their own character arcs, and we get the chance to know them in their own respective mini-stories within the larger narrative. In fact, sometimes there'll be entire segments, entire chapters of story where the protagonist doesn't even overtly appear until later on, just so we can get to know these side characters. And because we get to know these side characters, it makes later results all the more investing. And whether young or old, no one can escape the devastation of the main antagonist. And let's get the elephant out of the room, because the internet goes crazy over this kind of thing. Johann Liebert is one of the greatest antagonists ever written. I kid you not. If you want an example on how to write a villainous antagonist, you need to read about Johann Liebert in this series. Because, man, this is such an intense character. There's a reason why he's the titular monster of the series. I know others would like to say that monster is a metaphor for the inner darkness of humanity, but come on, let's be honest. The title is bluntly mentioning the main antagonist, the titular monster. This is an excellent antagonist. And much like Todd from Breaking Bad, he is an eerie depiction of a psychopath. And the series is well written in how Johann Liebert is a master of manipulating people. Let me give an example. Minor spoiler alert. There's this one particular scene where a detective is following a trail of evidence that seems to be putting Johann Liebert in a negative light, despite how masterfully Johann is able to cover up his tracks. I should also mention that the detective is expecting a visit from his wife and daughter. Whilst the detective is investigating this case, he's been visiting a psychiatrist because he's been suffering from a serious case of alcoholism, especially relating around this case where allegedly he was so drunk one night that he shot this troublesome teenager. Whilst in a pub mulling over all these particular details regarding this case, Johann Liebert, who is aware of the detective's suspicions, enters in and starts a conversation. Johann starts off as he usually does, putting on a polite facade to lure people in. Since he knows that this detective is more suspicious of him than most people, he actually kind of plays along with it in an ominous way. Johann Liebert starts to give little tidbits about the detective's past, as well as little tidbits about the case. He points out that the detective did shoot the teenager. The detective notices, but then Johann brushes it off, at least in the public space. Johann, by this point, has given him enough information to grab a bottle with him and come outside with him, giving him more information that the detective would desire. Gradually but surely, Johann leads the detective up a building, and the detective is determined to catch Johann. But when Johann reaches the top of the building, he reveals to the detective that he had been asking people on the night he shot the teenager if he was actually drunk, and not one of the people he asked recalled him getting drunk on alcohol.
It's kind of odd, Mr. Brown. I've researched this case exhaustively, and try as I might, I can't find a single person who saw you drinking before you murdered that young man. Not a one.
He's starting to tap into the detective's insecurities, especially when he addresses the detective. You shot that boy, and you knew exactly what you were doing. Did I get it right? The detective denies this, but then Johann does his final tactic of psychological manipulation. The presenting of a problem and the providing of a solution. Johann's presented problem is this. What will your wife and daughter think if they find out? Here, the detective is in utter dismay, to which Johann provides a solution. Hand him a bottle of alcohol. Then we cut to the next scene where the psychiatrist is addressed by two men in suits who reveals to him that the detective who's been visiting him has thrown himself off a building with a bottle of alcohol, committing suicide. Yikes! That right there is how you write a villain. Make him an imposing threat that needs to be stopped.
You can't keep getting away with it! He can't keep getting away with it! He won't.
It's through that manipulation, Johann is able to utterly devastate so many people throughout the series. And Johann isn't even a physically imposing threat akin to, say, Thanos from the Marvel series. All Johann has most of the time is his sharp mind that he misuses to ruin so many lives in such increasingly devastating ways. Seriously, without giving much away, there's one particular victim which really reveals Johann's cruelty more than anything. Let's just say it's at a particularly young age. I can understand why so many people would say that there's something eerily scary about Johann Liebert, especially with the fact that he's able to blend into any crowd as this German model-looking guy. Just the concept that this mass-manipulating psychopath could be amongst any kind of crowds and leaves very few traces of his crimes. And he has all the hallmarks of a great villain. Much like Heath Ledger's Joker, despite the few setbacks, he seems to be always a few steps ahead of everybody else. And much like Death from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, you can feel Johann Liebert's presence throughout most of the story. The way he's impacted other people, the fact that he could be anywhere at any particular point, the fact that he doesn't even show up most of the time and only appears sparingly, much like the Death Wolf from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, as well as a lot of slasher villains in that matter. It gives Johann Liebert this very eerily mystic vibe to him, which makes him a really imposing threat, and an unpredictable one at that. And basically, the overall message that this series presents, as Max Derrick pointed out, is that in the face of such overwhelming evil, what can we, as people, as humanity, do to oppose that kind of bleak, chaotic, nihilistic evil? And the show brings about a brilliant solution: love and kindness. Dr. Kenzo Tenma has an increasingly positive impact on the people around him, as well as encouraging other people who have gone through hell to find redemption. And the series points out that certain characters who have been through the same kind of hell as Johann Liebert did, they chose a better path and came out as better people. So that gives Johann Liebert no excuse for the evils that he commits. And through a brilliant series of character interactions and some profound character moments, the series points out that no matter how devastating evil can get, that real love is the one thing that evil can never really fully distort. And there are so many characters with so many struggles and so many conflicts. And keep in mind, this isn't just about Tenma versus Johann. Johann works on many ways as an antagonist, on a personal basis in the fact that he challenges Tenma's egalitarian values, as well as the overall weight that with every murder that Johann commits, that is indirectly more blood on Tenma's hands. But Johann also works on a mass scale, the fact that he's manipulating anyone and everyone all of the time. And this even seems to rub off on Tenma's main rivals throughout the story. His ex-fiancée, Eva, who wants to get revenge on Tenma, as well as the notorious Inspector Lunge, who's basically like the Inspector Javert of the story, if you will. It's interesting how this story, as well as following Tenma, also takes the time to follow a few other characters who also have their own intense moments. Like, for example, Eva is a spoiled rich jerk who has an alcohol problem, and yet we follow her from time to time, and she ends up getting into some very intense situations that gets you on the edge of your seat, to the point where you want her to survive certain situations, and you want her to change for the better. And with Inspector Lunge, he's the kind of detective where you can sense, yeah, he's a smart guy, and he does want justice, and he is following the right trail, but he keeps coming to the wrong conclusion, because Johann is so good at covering up his tracks that the blame is placed on Tenma. So Lunge in his pride assumes it just has to be Tenma, even when the evidence seems to be suggesting otherwise, much like Hank in Breaking Bad, I guess, is filtering out the possibility that it couldn't possibly be Tenma. You have all these tensions and then some going on throughout the entire story, and there's some greatly written redemption arcs and then some throughout the entire series. This series will keep you engaged, and the ending really does pay off the main story beats. The loose ends are wrapped up really nicely, and there is something else about the ending, but I'm not gonna spoil what exactly it is, because once you experience the ending, like a Christopher Nolan movie, it will encourage you to experience the entire story again, just to understand specific characters in a more authentic light. Honestly, I could go on and on about this particular series, but I can honestly say this is one of the greatest seinen series you will ever experience. I know there's this trend on the internet of the big three of seinen being Vagabond, Vinland Saga, and Berserk, but honestly, if there was a top 4, I guarantee you Monster would fit that slot, most likely. This series is an easy 12 out of 12 for me. It is as close to perfect as it gets. Any flaws I would have with this series are just mere nitpicks that don't get in the way of the sheer quality of the strength of the narrative. It's just that great. Do yourself a favor and go experience this story, whether it be in this manga series or in the anime adaptation that you can watch on Netflix. It's an excellent, excellent series. So, what do you think is the greatest anime series of all time? If you think it's something other than Monster, let me know in the comments down below. Or if you think Monster really is as great as I say it is, feel free to also comment likewise. If you have anything else to say about Monster, feel free to comment likewise. I'm looking forward to your comments. ScotsThinker signing out.